The bargain is very simple. Vote for us. If not, we will use violence to enact our agendas. The guy you work for, Destiny, has even said this quite clearly when he said that violence and riot are the other side of the coin to voting. That, of course, it's okay to affect political change in that sense. That's exactly what's going on.
So the next thing that I would say is that generally in law enforcement, despite the fact that most police chiefs, whether it's a commissioner, a sheriff, whatever it might be, leadership positions, stand behind their officers, generally they don't tell them things like you have absolute immunity to do what it is that you're doing. They give them full reign. They tell them that they're doing a good job. They back them up in all actions. You know that most officer-involved shootings, they don't make a comment on whether or not the officer was justified, unjustified, anything like that, right?
That's not true. The ones that become national news stories, they oftentimes say if it was justified or unjustified. Can you name me one that it wasn't?
You're telling me that on the day that it happens, within minutes, sometimes like within minutes of it happening, the police chief gets on air and says, this was a justified shot.
There's certainly been incidents where that's occurred.
Okay. You would agree, though, that most of the time, okay, when there is an officer-involved shooting, they say, we have an officer-involved shooting at the 500 block of East whatever street. Officer fired off several shots at a blah 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 blah. That you would agree with me that that's generally how they say what happened, in a way that makes it to where they don't put liability on the officer, they don't put liability on the victim or the perpetrator or the suspect or whatever word it is that you want to use. You know that most times, because that is the right thing to do, because investigation should occur, they do not put their finger on the scale in any sort of way, right?
I don't know. I would say that a lot of times you probably see agencies that are defending their own if they think there's clear visual evidence that shows there was no wrongdoing, particularly if they think there's likely to be riots or civil unrest. But let's say, for the sake of argument, I say yes. My counterexample would be, can you show me examples of mayors coming out immediately and saying it's murder? Is that also putting the thumb on the scale?
That is actually, yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. But that's what happens when ICE does shooting with like Tim Walz and Mayor Fry.
Yeah, but there's a difference here in that the mayor of a city isn't the person who is like the head of that department, right?
That's actually worse when they're saying that this agency needs to be removed.
Hold on, no. Hold on. If you're hold on. Go ahead. Actually, go ahead.
It is actually worse when you are a mayor or governor saying this agency is evil or whatever and needs to be removed, and then coming out before all of the facts and calling them murderers. You have to understand that the likelihood of that causing people to take violent action is going to be very high. That's more significant than anything. For example, you could come out, the head of ICE could come out and say, I think this was a justified shooting, and then later they could investigate it and say, no, actually it was wrong. What's the big harm there? Yeah, you spoke too soon, and that's not good. Nonetheless, justice was served.
Okay. We'll go back to what my point is that the head of the agency is the one that is causing people to believe that the shooting is justified in a way that most people, when they see a video, they don't see what it is that's being said. Do you agree that Freddie or Renee Good are domestic terrorists?
I don't know. It would depend on how you.
Do you think? Hold on. Do you think? That's not what I asked.
Yes,
that's not what I asked.
I think the insurrectionists would be terrorists. Yes. Here's what your guy Destiny calls an insurrection. Ready? An assemblage of people united for a common cause. Do you agree that's what Renee Good and Freddie were?
Yes.
Were they resisting the implication or execution of a law or interfering with it?
Yes.
Force or intimidation?
No.
Yes, of course. Of course they were. Preddy actually put his hands on law enforcement. They were blowing whistles in their ear, would be intimidation. They're screaming, fuck you, you're Nazis and stuff. That's all intimidation. Renee Good actually advanced her car to the point where it probably hit. That's force or intimidation. They were obstructing with vehicles. Was it for a public purpose?
Rob, I'm not gonna. I don't think these people are. No.
Yeah, it wasn't for a public purpose. So they weren't out there protesting ICE and immigration policy. They had individual reasons. They were out there because that particular officer stole their lawn chair or something to that effect.
No, probably over personal feelings that they have. I don't.
Personal
Rob, I
feelings
don't want to
over
talk
what?
about whether or not these people are insurrectionists. Okay, I'm not going to be
An
drugged down this thing.
insurrectionist. I
No,
think
I'm going to
if we
ask you
acknowledge-
again about the domestic terrorism thing, because this is what's
yes,
actually the problem,
yes,
Rob.
I think that if, based on the definition of the guy you follow, if they're insurrectionists, it's fair to call them terrorists as well. Sure.
Okay, what's the definition of terrorist that you use, Rob?
I would say a terrorist is a non-state actor that's using violence or intimidation to achieve political motivations.
Through what?
I just said violence or intimidation.
No, there's a specific part in terrorism that okay, I understand that you believe that the Renee Good shooting was justified, okay? I understand that because she was the vehicle was heading towards the officer or whatever it is that you want to say, right? Is that terrorism? Okay, can I just ask you, do you think that she was actually trying to kill the officer? I understand that you think that the officer saw himself as being in danger, okay? Do you think that she was trying to hit the officer? Just your actual opinion. Or do you think she was trying to get away?
She probably was just trying to get away.
I agree with that, right? No matter what I think in that, like, the officer might have felt in any sort of way, I personally think that, like, I have more experience in knowing how law enforcement is trained, in that I do not think that that officer was in the right to shoot somebody, because I believe that he put himself in a position that he shouldn't have been in. But I can more see that side of things when people talk about it. The Preddy situation, you can show me whatever of an officer getting his hands put on him or whatever. Use of force doesn't work in the way that, oh, well, you know, even if there was an accidental, it doesn't matter, Rob. There's a higher standard in when you use lethal force.
Like, it seems to be you're moving from the point that you just suggested. The guy you work for would say, based on his definition, these are domestic terrorists. Here's
he
the
wouldn't
DHS.
say that they're domestic terrorists.
Well, no,
maybe if you argued with them, it'd be insurrectionist.
Let me rephrase. The guy you work for is a hack that wouldn't admit it, but based on his definition. Now, I believe an insurrectionist, the language for insurrection is very similar to the language of terrorists. Here's how the DHS defines domestic terrorism. DHS looks to Homeland Security definition of terrorism, 6 U.S.C. 101-18, which is substantially similar, not identical to Title 18. Defines terrorism as any activity that involves, is dangerous to human life or potentially destructive of critical infrastructure or key resources, and is a violation of criminal laws of the United States and or other subdivision of the United States, and appears to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. There you have it. People committing crimes intended to coerce or influence policies and governmental actions of the United States. That's terrorism, according to the DHS.
Do you think that the people? Okay, if you you're sticking to that.
What was your point?
You're sticking to that definition.
I'm just asking. You seem to say, you were going to say, how dare people in the Trump administration call them terrorists? You coming from a channel
I said that. Would you label somebody a domestic terrorist within minutes of a shooting happening? Because that is where the issue is, Rob.
Let me finish. You coming from a channel where you're a moderator that has screamed and hyperventilated about January 6th being terrible terrorists and insurrections for years. And all of a sudden you want to quibble when the shoe's on the other foot. Now, would I come out and say, I don't know that I would say that immediately. Maybe not the most prudent thing to do. Nonetheless, I don't see what the point of any of this is. You're trying to make excuses.
I'm glad that you hold yourself to a standard higher than the people in our federal government that are in cabinet positions of the presidency.
You're trying to make excuses for the fact that we see these violent intentional obstruction actions.
I'm not trying to make any excuses.
Of course, that's what you're trying to do. That's why you said I'll finish my point. It's my channel.
Go ahead.
Please, I'll finish my point, right? The fact that you said, well, it's because ICE is unique. ICE is unique. That's why all this shit's happening. This came about from me saying, no, these violent interactions will continue to be inevitable because people like the guy you work for want people to get in the face and obstruct ICE. And as you admitted, if there's enough obstruction from any law enforcement agency, inevitably we would expect to see violent altercations. My contention to you is, even if these it doesn't matter if it's really that ICE is at fault or not, you people are going to use these altercations because you want the martyrs. And then you're going to say, see, this is why we need to disband ICE or we need to remove ICE, thus achieving the very political agenda that you wanted. The bargain is very simple. Vote for us. If not, we will use violence to enact our agendas. The guy you work for, Destiny, has even said this quite clearly when he said that violence and riot are the other side of the coin to voting. That, of course, it's okay to affect political change in that sense. That's exactly what's going on. Then you want to clutch your pearls when inevitably a bad action happens. It goes, oh my God, everybody needs to condemn this. But the game's easy to see. You people want this. And if you don't, if you're not like Destiny, then you ought to be ashamed to work for a guy that does.
I wanted to let you finish. Are you good?
That's it.
Okay. I'm not ashamed because I don't hold any sort of feeling like what you do about him, but it is what it is. Now, do you believe that even if you believe that the people meet the definition of terrorism or whatever it is, okay, do you think that our officials in the government, in cabinet positions, and the president himself should be calling these people domestic terrorists before an investigation is undone?
I think that is probably not the most prudent thing to do. The ability, the wrongness of that pales in comparison to calling our officers terrorists, Nazis, etc. And I noticed that you're not concerned with it.
What?
You're just like, yeah, well, it's all ICE's fault.
No. I have different standards that I put out, like a random Twitter user. I really don't give a shit about. Okay, and then when it's like a public
AOC?
figure,
How about Mayor Fry? How about Tim Walz? How about Kamala Harris? How about them?
They call them Nazi. Like, what is it that you're wanting me to say that it's bad?
Call them Nazi, call them fascist, call them unjustified. Say they're monsters.
If I called you a Nazi, Rob, would you cry about it?
No. If I called you a terrorist, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay, then what are you clutching your pearls about? You're the one doing it, not me.
No, because we both agree that the reason actually that it's hold on. Yeah. The reason that we both agree that it's a problem is because of people not like me and you. That when we hear somebody be called a terrorist, we don't automatically think of them as a terrorist, right? We can look into things a little bit more.
That's
okay.
Untrue.
If I call somebody a Nazi, no, it is true, because if I call somebody a Nazi,
I can prove it.
Go ahead.
How long did left-wingers, including those in office, wait to call January 6 people criminals, terrorists, insurrectionists, etc.? How long did they wait? Did they wait for the investigations?
Probably not very long, because it was all filmed.
Now, I remember though that you were on Reddit saying, this is outrageous. It's so odd that they're coming out before the investigation was over and saying these terrible things.
I wasn't on Reddit in 2021 on January 6th.
But since then you've said that. Wow. Right? I mean, you work for a guy who talks about January 6th damn near every day. So you were like, wow, I think it's outrageous how people jump to label these people as terrible things, even before investigations were over.
No, right? Because when something is recorded and we can see what is happening in the recording, you can make a judgment, like right?
With Renee Good?
Sure.
So we can make a judgment.
Yeah, me and you can make a judgment. That's correct.
All right. What about the Democratic politicians that made the judgment on January 6th?
They can make that judgment as well.
And so can Trump's administration, right?
No, because again, Trump's administration...
There it is. No. When my side did it, it was okay. But now it's
you would agree that there's a... No.
Yeah,
Dude, you love this, don't you?
I do, dude. You're right. I do love this
because I hold the president to the highest standard ever. So, like, the president shouldn't do that. Hold on. The president, I can say, should be at the utmost of all levels of everybody to cage their words in a way that cannot be misinterpreted and cannot cause issue. We would agree on that, right?
I think that the president should be held to a standard similar to a senator, a congressman, etc. I think that
No, you
trying to
don't.
equivocate that it was okay. Absolutely, I do. If you're saying it's unprudent for the president to say someone's a terrorist, but if the opposition leader in the Senate says it, it's not that bad. That's bullshit.
Who did Chuck Schumer call a terrorist?
The Democrats almost ubiquitously, almost immediately.
Who did Chuck? No, you just brought up Chuck Schumer. Who did Chuck Schumer call a terrorist?
Okay, let me find. Merch shop's up, RobNoerr.shop. Go to RobNoerr.shop if you want like cool hats, shirts, hoodies. The promo code is 10 off FEB, 10 off Feb.
Well, you're just saying things that you don't have an example of, right? I can tell you when Trump's called somebody a terrorist.
When did he
But
call
you
Renee
just
Good a
said the
terrorist?
opposition leader in the Senate. He called who a terrorist?
When did he call Renee Good a terrorist?
Yeah.
Okay, when was the post?
What day did she get killed? It was like the 9th, right? Something like that, or the 12th, or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
The day of.
The day of. Okay.
Yes.
Let's see. I'll see if I can find Chuck Schumer ever calling January 6 people terrorists, insurrections, etc.
No. I just asked terrorists. Rob. Rob. You are a smart person.
Chuck Schumer
okay?
stated those who perform reprehensible act cannot be called protesters. No, these were rioters, insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists. Whoopsie. They're a stain on the country. Uh-oh.
When did he say that?
January 6, 2021.
Perfect.
The day of. He called them domestic terrorists the day of. Uh-oh.
Okay.
Huh.
Do you believe that there were people doing domestic terrorism on January 6th?
It's irrelevant. You said that they should be hesitant.
I'm asking you. Hold on.
It's irrelevant. The question's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what I said. You said it's irresponsible for leaders before an investigation has been finished to make these sort of judgments.
You're correct. I did say that.
Okay, so then what's it matter what I think if they were domestic terrorists there?
Because I made that claim and I said that it's wrong when people do that. You are saying that it's not wrong when people do that. I will say Chuck Schumer shouldn't call people terrorists, okay? He can call them insurrectionists, he can call them whatever. Terrorist holds a specific meaning in the common parlance of the United States. You would agree with that, right? There's a little thing called September 11th that made terrorists kind of high on most people's shit.
Yes, I get that. Like, sort of, I get this sort of like, let's deflect from the fact that the very thing that I said. No. Yes, I get it. And now you're like,
I didn't.
Oh, but Rob, did you call them terrorists? What does this have anything to do with the relevancy of what we just said? So yes, the most powerful Democrat at the time, immediately the day of January 6th, called them terrorists.
Perfect.
And okay, so what's with all the pearl clutching now?
Because I say that that's bad to do.
Okay,
you don't say that that's bad to do.
Did I say that? I said, yeah, that's probably not a bad thing or not a good thing. I said,
no. You said, no, yes, I would probably say that we shouldn't do it. No, why can't you just say it's a bad thing for the president to call somebody a domestic terrorist?
Why did you just say, so you said president, so you don't think that's the case for Chuck Schumer?
Because I asked you about Trump.
Why can't you just say that it was wrong for all the Democrats to do this? Why can't you just say that?
I just said that. I said that it's wrong for...
Excellent. So the pearl clutching is irrelevant. What does this have to do? Well, there's all this violence that's occurring. I'm making the claim the violence is going to be inevitable because people keep calling for violence.
I'm consistent on this, Rob.
People keep calling
Rob, I'm consistent on this.
Here's what you're consistent on the deflection. I agree, right? And when you're
I'm consistent on that. I will condemn people calling people domestic terrorists without having the terrorism charge on people.
Okay. So imagine this. Let's say this, you're like, Rob, what did you think about this Preddy killing? And I said, I think it's despicable. Chuck Schumer called the January 6 people terrorists. Wouldn't you be like, yeah, okay, what? What the fuck? Okay? That's what you're doing, right? What you're doing is I'm like, you see, what's happening is the left is encouraging all of these obstruction efforts will inevitably lead to violent altercations. You agree. And then you're like, yes, but Trump shouldn't have said they were terrorists. That's so bad. And I'm like, look, the precedent's been set. Democrats did it as well with January 6th. And you're like, ah, yes, but I condemn that. Cool, you condemn it. And what's that have anything to do with Democrats that are essentially setting up obstruction efforts against ICE that'll lead to violent confrontations?
Because Rob, regardless of if Democrats are doing that and they're leading to these obstructionists that will inevitably lead to violence or whatever, you can still say that the violence is bad. Okay,
Who said you couldn't?
Okay.
Applying it in
All
the
right,
way
so
that
what's your point?
things.
Yes, what I'm saying is I'm making a specific accusation that the violence, yes, I agree. I don't want the violence. I wish the left would stop obstructing ICE. I wish they would stop leading to violent confrontation, but they won't. In the areas where they do, like Minneapolis, we're going to see more confrontations. Sometimes it'll be ICE being hurt. Just tonight, they're trying to break into a hotel where they think ICE is. We had an ICE officer with his finger bitten off. We had one in Dallas that was shot in the neck. We had ICE officers that were shot at by lefties that killed a lefty that killed 2 people that were detained. We have countless numbers of times that ICE have had their vehicles rammed into, etc. Right? But all of that gets shoved to the back because it's like, well, Trump said Renee Good was a terrorist. So, and what I'm saying is, what we see is what makes this unique is the demonization of ICE and the fact that there are intentional obstructions. We even have signal chats. Oh, disappeared? Unfortunate. I was having a good time.